For a long time on this show, we've said that the left have infiltrated Australia's main supposed to be centre-right and conservative political party, the Liberal Party, and we got proof of it in big, bright, shiny lights this week when a left-wing Liberal member was appointed to a plum Labor government job in a political move designed simply to embarrass Peter Dutton and yet again put the best interests of our country second by political game playing.
Today, Cabinet has agreed to appoint the Honourable Matt Kean as Chair of the Climate Change Authority.
On this show, we don't assume everyone lives in New South Wales, so we need to tell you who this bloke is. Matthew Kean is a 43-year-old state politician who was the Treasurer in New South Wales from 2021 until 2023 when the Liberals lost power. Before that, he was the state's Energy and Environment Minister, so he's got some cred for the new job that Albo's given him as head of the Climate Change Authority. What is that, you ask? And why is Albo appointing a Liberal to this job? Well, the Climate Change Authority is another of these statutory authorities, these little offices that the government likes to set up to waste our tax money to do the things that the bureaucracy should already be doing but is failing to do so. So instead of fixing the bureaucracy and running the government properly, they set up another bureaucracy to make it look like they're doing something and so they don't have to sack anyone or hold anyone actually accountable for anything. For those of us who actually work and are productive in this country, that would be like you noticing that your small business staff weren't getting the job done, but instead of sacking them and fixing things, you just hire some new people to do their job instead. But I'd go broke if I did that, I hear you say. Well, yes, but that's where government is different. Government just tell their customers, us, to pay more. But I couldn't ask my customers to pay more, I hear you say. They'd just go somewhere else. Yes, but government can force their customers to pay more with guns, until they give up and leave the country, if they can. Anyway, I digress. We have a climate change authority, whether we like it or not, and it costs about, well, nobody knows because it isn't in their annual report. I checked. But it's in the order of tens of millions of dollars a year. As Senator Matt Kean said this week, it's just another Canberra waste of money and needs to be shut down. And now, in one of the most blatantly obvious, transparent acts of political theatre we've seen in years, a move so obvious that a child would notice it, Albo appoints the lefty Liberal Matt Kean to be the head of the thing, and the first thing that comes out of Kean's mouth is, surprise, an attack on Peter Dutton's nuclear policy that he announced last week. Like a good puppy? Who's a good little boy then, eh? You're a good Matty, you are.
In 2019, when I was appointed as the Energy Minister by Gladys Berejiklian, I was told the first day on the job that in the next decade, 4 of the state's coal-fired power stations would come to an end. And we needed a mechanism in place to replace that capacity. Now, we looked at all options, including nuclear. Now, I didn't want to bankrupt the state, and I didn't want to put those huge costs onto families. That's why we introduced the Electricity Infrastructure Roadmap, which planned the transition to renewables backed up by firming and storage. This is not about ideology, this is about outcomes.
Well, maybe he is sincere. At least now he's working for the right political party for him and being honest with the Australian public about his true politics. But as sincere as he may be, he's wrong. There's no reason nuclear should not be part of the energy mix for Australia moving forward, and no reason why we should be subsidising with taxpayers' money the renewables industry to the level that we are. We'll be discussing all that later in this week's show with our energy guru on the other side, Ben Beattie from the Baseload podcast, and our resident economics boffin, Mr. Scott Pelto. They'll both be here on set for me for a deep dive on all that very shortly. But you may be wondering what happened to the existing person in charge of the Climate Change Authority. Well, his name is Grant King, and he wasn't due to finish up his job until next year. Surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, the Australian newspaper reports that he recently backed calls for Australia to consider nuclear power as part of its future energy mix, and he supported plans to store carbon emissions from fossil fuel production. Uh-oh, that's not allowed. No solutions allowed other than renewables. That's the rules that the elites have bestowed upon us, and we must follow. So what happened to Mr. Grant King? Well, the Australian reports that he was subjected to an integrity and conflict of interest inquiry. Interesting timing. And even though Mr. King was not found to have any conflict of interest himself, Mr. Bowen thought it was a good idea to end his contract a year early. You see, you must never go off script. Mr. King recently very sensibly said that, quote, there's still a great desire to define good fuels and bad fuels, and that's not going to help us get there. We need absolutely everything working for us, and that also includes nuclear power. And that drew criticism from a far left-wing think tank called the Australia Institute and from Greens senators. Then the Australia Institute asked Mr. Bowen to investigate potential conflicts of interest at the Climate Change Authority. And they did, but they didn't find any, so now maybe it's time someone investigated the Australia Institute and the Greens for possible conflicts of interest, perhaps.